The 1999 Arnold Classic, organized by the IFBB in Columbus, went down in history as one of the strongest and most competitive editions the contest had ever seen. This wasn't just another show on the calendar. It was an event surrounded by hype, stacked with big names, and featuring a technical level that raised the bar for professional bodybuilding at the end of the decade. By that point, the Arnold Classic was making it clear that it didn't want to be seen as just the second biggest show in the world. It was positioning itself as a stage where the best physiques on the planet went head-to-head on equal footing, often with lineups just as deep and dangerous as the Mr. Olympia itself. And 1999 was the year that reputation was truly cemented. Another key factor was that the event was already fully integrated into the Arnold Fitness Weekend, which was a groundbreaking concept at the time. It wasn't just bodybuilding on stage. It was a full-blown festival of sport, fitness, and physical culture designed to attract not only hardcore fans, but also the general public. That approach helped bring everyday spectators closer to a sport that, until then, often felt distant and hard to understand. This shift was also reflected in how bodybuilding was presented to the audience. Broadcasts started doing a better job of explaining judging criteria, comparisons, and the small details that really matter on stage. All of that made the experience more accessible and engaging. After all, it's hard to fall in love with something you don't understand. When you look at the physical level, the technical quality, and the historical weight of the athletes who stepped on that stage in 1999, it becomes clear that this edition marked a real turning point. It was a meeting of established stars and future icons, right at a moment when bodybuilding was moving into a new era. The standout name of the event was, without question, Nasser El Sonbaty. Stepping on stage at around 131 kilos, roughly 290 pounds, Nasser brought a physique that made an immediate impact. It was a rare combination of extreme mass, insane muscle density, and a level of conditioning that set him apart from the rest of the field. That win carried huge symbolic weight. In the two previous years, 1997 and 1998, Nasser had come painfully close to the title, finishing second both times. In 1999, he finally closed that chapter for good, completing what many fans came to call his Arnold Classic trilogy. This wasn't just a one-off victory. It was the culmination of a consistently built career. What made the title even more special was how it happened. Nasser earned a perfect score, 26 points, meaning total unanimity from the judges in every round. At a contest of this caliber, with so many legendary physiques on stage, that's extremely rare and says a lot about the level of dominance he displayed that night. The result also locked in his status among the global elite of bodybuilding. Just a few months earlier, Nasser had taken third place at the 1998 Mr. Olympia, the biggest stage in the sport. Winning the Arnold Classic proved that performance wasn't a fluke. It was the result of an athlete at the absolute peak of his physical and competitive prime. From that moment on, Nasser El Sonbaty stopped being seen as the almost champion and became one of the defining symbols of the so-called mass era. And if Nasser's victory was undeniable, the rest of the podium shows just how insane the level of that competition really was. The runner-up spot went to Kevin Levrone, an athlete who, by that time, was already regarded as one of the most complete physiques in bodybuilding history. Levrone wasn't just another big, powerful competitor. He represented the perfect balance between raw size and aesthetics. Even going up against a dominant Nasser that night, Kevin brought an elite-level physique, reinforcing why he was so often labeled one of the greatest, almost champions of the modern era. In third place was Chris Cormier, known for a physique that was thick, powerful, and yet still carried a classic look. But maybe the name that drew the most attention outside the podium was Jay Cutler. At just 26 years old, Jay finished in fourth place, already showing clear signs that something big was in the making. His muscle density, and especially his out-of-this-world quadriceps, made it obvious that this wasn't just another promising athlete. It was the beginning of a new era. Rounding out the top six were two highly respected names from the pro circuit: Milos Sarcev in fifth place and Vince Taylor in sixth. Both were already well-established athletes, with solid careers and physiques recognized worldwide. Even outside the podium, Arnold Classic 1999 is impressive when you really look at the rest of the top 15. One of the most symbolic names on that list is Dexter Jackson, who finished only in 7th place, but would later become the most successful Arnold Classic champion of all time. Back in 1999, Dexter was still in a building phase, but he was already showing clean lines, consistency, and a very competitive physique. The lineup also featured highly respected competitors like Darrem Charles, Gunter Schleierkamp, Don Long, and Roland Kickinger. Each of these athletes had a completely different look, which made the comparisons more interesting and the judging far more challenging. What really stands out is the depth of the lineup. This wasn't a show with just a few strong names at the top and the rest filling space. It was an event where almost everyone in the top 15 had a real career, titles, or lasting impact on the history of professional bodybuilding. That alone adds a lot to the historical value of the competition. Because of that, when fans and experts look back at the 1999 Arnold Classic, it's often mentioned as one of the strongest lineups ever assembled in a single event. One of the most talked about topics before and during the contest was the absence of Flex Wheeler, the 1998 champion and, in the eyes of many, the most aesthetic bodybuilder of his generation. Flex would naturally have entered as one of the main favorites for the title. His absence didn't go unnoticed and completely changed the tone of the competition. Flex Wheeler was coming off an incredibly strong phase of his career, delivering physiques that many still consider among the most impressive in bodybuilding history. When an athlete of that level is suddenly out of such a highly anticipated contest, the impact is immediate. The big question behind the scenes was simple: who would fill the void left by a reigning champion in his prime? The reason for his absence was serious and unexpected. Flex was involved in a violent attempted robbery, a carjacking, that resulted in a severe arm injury, making it impossible for him to compete that year. With his arm in a cast, there was no chance of stepping on stage, abruptly ending his preparation for the event. That situation created a mix of shock and frustration among fans and athletes alike. Many saw 1999 as a potential continuation of Flex's dominance at the Arnold Classic, while others viewed it as a rare opportunity for new names to step up. A contest that was already expected to be historic suddenly became even more tense because of this twist. And it was exactly this absence that opened the door to a completely different outcome. Without the defending champion on stage, the battle for the title took a new direction, allowing other athletes to shine and write their own chapters in the event's history. Now, I'd like to take a moment to talk a bit more about the man who won it all that night, because behind the massive physique that dominated the 1999 Arnold Classic was a figure completely outside the usual bodybuilding mold. Nasser El Sonbaty was known in the community as the Professor, a nickname that had nothing to do with the stage and everything to do with his life outside of it. In a sport often associated purely with physicality, Nasser stood out for his mind. He spoke 7 languages, held multiple academic degrees, and was widely recognized as one of the most analytical athletes of his generation. Nasser didn't train based on instinct or repetition alone. He studied his own body, understood biomechanics, physiology, and competitive strategy. That rational approach goes a long way in explaining his long-term consistency at the highest level. Interestingly enough, bodybuilding wasn't his original goal. Nasser started lifting weights simply to improve his performance in soccer, with no intention of stepping on stage or becoming a professional competitor. What began as athletic cross-training turned into a legendary career, almost by accident and completely out of control. Another thing that always drew attention was his direct, often controversial personality. Unlike most athletes, Nasser openly said he had no idols in bodybuilding. He analyzed physiques in a cold, technical way and even publicly criticized Arnold Schwarzenegger's physique, something that was almost unthinkable in the sport, especially at that time. All of these traits helped shape the unique image of Nasser El Sonbaty. He wasn't just a massive athlete. He was a thinker in a sport that rarely valued that side of the equation. Coming back to the event itself, by 1999 the Arnold Classic was clearly entering a new phase. The contest was no longer designed only for people who already deeply understood bodybuilding, but also for those who were experiencing the sport for the very first time. One of the biggest standouts of that edition was the care put into how the show was presented. During the broadcasts, detailed explanations of the judging criteria were introduced, something that had been uncommon until then. For the first time, Many fans could clearly understand why one athlete was placed ahead of another, what truly mattered in comparisons, and how judges evaluated each physique. That educational approach had a huge impact on the viewer experience. Bodybuilding stopped feeling like a closed-off sport full of mysterious decisions and started to look more logical and understandable. When the audience understands what they're watching, engagement grows, and curiosity turns into real passion. On top of that, this approach helped solidify the Arnold Classic as much more than just a competition. It established itself as a major sports, cultural, and media event, perfectly aligned with the growth of the Arnold Fitness Weekend, which already brought together multiple disciplines, expos, and interactive experiences for the public. The event wasn't memorable only on the men's side. It also played a key role in strengthening and increasing the visibility of women's bodybuilding, especially with the Ms. International, which was one of the most prestigious contests in the division at the time. The big winner was Vicky Gates, who stood out in an extremely competitive field. She brought a powerful, dense, and well-conditioned physique, exactly what defined the peak of women's bodybuilding in the late 1990s. That victory firmly placed her among the most important athletes in the history of the division. The level of competition becomes even clearer when you look at the top 5. Alongside Vicky Gates were Lisa Lewis, Yolanda Hughes, Tazzy Collum, and Andrella Blanchett, all elite athletes with very different physiques, which made comparisons richer and judging highly technical. That lineup clearly showed the strength of the women's division at the time. It wasn't a secondary category, it was a stage with its own identity, charismatic athletes, and physiques that demanded the same level of respect and analysis as the men's. For many fans, the 1999 Ms. International was one of the strongest of the entire decade. Beyond professional bodybuilding, the event also highlighted other categories. In the Fitness International, the title went to Susie Curry, symbolizing the growing diversity within the Arnold Classic. This reinforced the idea that the event was already moving toward a broader, more inclusive format that represented different expressions of the sport. When people talk about the Arnold Classic, few editions carry as much historical weight as 1999. Above all, that event is remembered for the definitive coronation of Nasser El Sonbaty, who finally captured the title after years of coming up just short. But the impact of that night went far beyond a single trophy raised on stage. The 1999 Arnold Classic is also remembered as the stage where future legends began to solidify their place. Athletes like Jay Cutler and Dexter Jackson weren't established champions yet, but they were already showing clear signs that they would dominate the sport in the years to come. Seeing those names share the stage with the giants of that era highlights just how special that lineup truly was. Another decisive factor was the rare balance between generations. Established athletes at the peak of their careers competed side by side with rising stars. That created a powerful narrative where the past, present, and future of bodybuilding all met in a single event, something very few competitions have managed to replicate with the same intensity. On top of everything else, the 1999 Arnold Classic represented a major step forward in how the sport was presented. The combination of elite-level competition with a more accessible approach helped cement the event as a global benchmark. It wasn't just about who had the most muscle, it was about understanding, spectacle, and legacy. That's why, even today, this edition is constantly brought up when people talk about lineup quality, historical impact, and the evolution of bodybuilding. And the question that remains for anyone who follows the sport is simple. How many events truly managed to define an entire era the way the 1999 Arnold Classic did?